Some of us spend our entire lives trying to attain what is considered nothing more than God's footstool. When we are engaged in God's work, He will bless us with wealth to take care of us and to further His work. The point is to change your heart. Focus on God. Love Him and want what He wants.
This is To Live the Truth, the podcast. My name is Ryan Clausen. In this show, my wonderful wife, Allie, and I dive into my book, To Live the Truth, which you can read for free at ryantclausen.com. Today, we're continuing our discussion on Chapter 13, The Deceitfulness of Riches. Last episode, we talked about why riches are deceitful. And the simplest answer to that question we determined was that we are tempted to trust in riches themselves rather than what riches are just a symbol of, which is human relations, human labor. You said the people are the wealth because our money would be of no value to us if it weren't for people. So this episode, we're going to talk about what is the remedy of the deceitfulness of riches, which is something we are still working on. Mm-hmm. And that I believe is just a lifelong, even an eternal project, is to work on developing this trait, which goes by many names. Charity is a common one, social affection, friendly, trusting relations, human kindness, brotherly love. But yeah, the word charity is a big word, and it's also just kind of has multiple meanings.
We kind of use that word to encompass a lot of feelings and a lot of different actions that it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it means for you or like how you're going to apply it into your life.
Exactly. And so that's why I like to use other words for it. I like friendly, trusting relations. That brings it much more down to earth, and it's more measurable and easy to detect. So the question is just in your day-to-day dealings, how much friendliness and trust do you practice? Now, how does this influence economics? What role does this play in our economy? Friendly, trusting relations. It doesn't seem like an obvious answer. And in fact, many people would say that it is a barrier to economic success, right? There are certain phrases we use, like nice guys finish last, that kind of suggests that when it comes to business, you just look out for yourself, you do whatever it takes to bring home the money. And even if that comes at the cost of stabbing somebody in the back or bending the truth or manipulating people, taking advantage, the car salesman's going to try and deceive you to get more money. It's a shortcut that they've taken for economic success. So it seems like maybe a bold claim to say that they're wrong, that the true path to economic success is trusting, friendly relations.
Obviously, we have examples of economic success from people exhibiting trusting and friendliness towards one another.
Right. The Book of Mormon provides examples of people who thrived, not in spite of their trust and altruism, but as a direct result of those things. The best example is the 150 years after the coming of Christ, where there were no poor among them because they had made all things common. They were sharing everything. When they found somebody in need, those needs were met by the community. And it resulted in 150 years of peace and prosperity. Really quite something remarkable. Contrast that with what happened later after these feelings began to kind of fade and drift. Some among them were lifted up in pride and began to wear costly apparel, and from that time forth they did have their goods and substance no more common among them, and they began to be divided into classes and began to seek to get gain. And at the end of that, they are just constantly warring and fighting amongst each other. And it presents a clear, logical example that the opposite of trust and friendliness is At a more innocent level, just non-cooperation. And at the most extreme level, out and out war, fighting, right? And when you think about the effects of war, it is not economically favorable. War pulls people away from their communities. It takes men from their farms, from their workplaces in order to fight. And then, of course, all the death. That's, again, human life that is being squandered and destroyed that could be spent in efforts that would bring life. If you look at it on a spectrum of how much caring and friendliness are in a community, and on one end of the spectrum we have full-on war, and on the other end of the spectrum we have this peaceful state of sharing and all things being common among the people, it's obvious which one of those two is in a wealthier and more economically stable and happier state, right? And so it becomes clear the degree to which a community has those friendly, trusting relations is the degree to which they will experience that peace and prosperity. But like I write at this point, it may seem pretty unrealistic and pretty unhopeful. Like, this may be true, but what do we do with it when we live in a world as divided and tumultuous as we do? And my main argument is that even irrespective of what the economic benefits may be to cultivating charity, caring in your community, to develop that trait in yourself is infinitely worthwhile just for its own sake.
If we want to see a change in society or community, Ruskin says it's by individual, not public effort. So I think us talking about this, like, we can't change our whole society. We can't even change our neighborhood, most likely, but we can change ourselves. We can work on how we view other people, how we act with other people, how we trust others. And that's where we can start. And then, like you said, by doing that, it's worthwhile in and of itself. Even if it doesn't bring our society to the outcome we want, we will experience the benefits and the blessings that come from living that way.
Yes, absolutely. Let's briefly talk about how to cultivate charity in our hearts. The central advice, I guess, that I felt I needed to share is this principle that loving thy neighbor can really only come as a result of developing love for God. C.S. Lewis said, "It would be quite wrong to think that the way to become charitable is to sit trying to manufacture affectionate feelings."
I'm trying to understand. Leo Tolstoy emphasized that true love for fellow men cannot be attained without a proper relation to God. Happiness to a man depends not on loving this or that object, but on loving the principle of the whole, God. But I don't understand the last part, whom he recognizes within himself as love, and therefore he loves all things and all men.
Yeah, so no, it's a good question. And this is kind of what I'm getting at with what C.S. Lewis said, that we can't just sit there trying to manufacture affectionate feelings for our fellow men. That's skipping an important step. What Tolstoy is suggesting is that since God is the principle of the whole, meaning basically he is the trunk of the tree, God is the creator and is the central connecting point of all creation. Rather than believing that happiness is dependent on learning to love all the material things around you, we need to start at the very center and learn to love God. And then as a direct result of that, you will just naturally love all of God's creations, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And like that rings so true, especially when you just think about even like things that we've learned in marriage. There's that diagram of the triangle, and God is at the very top, and we represent each of the two bottom corners. And as we draw nearer to God, the triangle naturally shrinks, and the distance between the two of us becomes also shorter. And I just think you can expand that to all people and all things on earth. That the closer you draw to God, the greater capacity you have to really connect with all of his creations. But on a deeper level, rather than on a materialistic, shallow level, it expands your understanding and perspective of God's creations. That's absolutely essential. Just as Corrie ten Boom said, that when God commands us to love, he gives along with the command the love itself. This ties back into John 15. As we abide in Christ, then he abides in us. We are the branches of the vine. If we disconnect from him, then all power, all capacity withers away. And above all, that is the ability to love. When we say God is love, we do mean it very seriously, that to be separated from God is to lose all capacity for love. And an interesting side effect of that process is that our love for the people and creations in our world becomes a more natural, healthy kind of love. Rather than setting our hearts upon the things of this world, we still love and honor them, but as God's creations, as objects for which we have stewardship, right? Rather than things placed there to gratify our appetites. I give the example of Moses, who abandons the riches of Egypt in order to follow God, right?
Mm-hmm.
The anti-Nephi-Lehi's are people who were living in a very sensual existence filled with plunder and murder. And when they encounter God and learn about him and develop a relationship with him, they naturally turn away from their materialistic behavior.
I like both of those examples. They chose to align their goals with God's and attain, instead of riches, what truly matters, and focusing on God and people. And I like this part on page 215, where you talk about the earth and all its riches comprising nothing more than God's footstool, while his work and glory, his peculiar treasure, being nothing less than each and every human soul to ever live. And I just really liked that. And it made me think how sad it is and so absurd that some of us spend our entire lives focusing and trying to attain what is considered God's footstool. And for some reason, we can't get it in our heads that that is not the treasure. That is not the purpose. It's something so unimportant that just struck me this time that wow, the footstool, when you put it in those words, it's just crazy that we are blinded. And that is the deceitfulness of riches.
Yeah. And the fact that we will easily betray and inflict harm upon the people in order to secure for ourselves those earthly treasures. It's such a backward approach. It reveals just a complete misunderstanding of what's truly important. That paragraph you quoted comes in the context of claiming that as we align with God, as we draw closer to him and become more like him, then our priorities become more closely aligned with his. And so we gain a clearer vision of things as they really are, recognizing the earth as really just a footstool. Whereas each individual soul is a child of God, an eternal being of infinite value. Even the lowliest, meanest person you meet is of infinite worth to God, who loves that person unfathomably and just as much as he loves you. It's so important to remind ourselves of that often. So that is the course of action of most value to us, developing that character trait of charity, of brotherly love for one another. And there's a great illustration that I actually got from E.F. Schumacher, and it's about the iceberg, right? I say that real prosperity goes beyond external riches and must be founded upon character. Outer wealth is much like the tip of an iceberg, which is visible above the surface only because of the enormous unseen base floating beneath. In the same way, sustained economic success rests largely on the invisible things that are making the visible possible and keep it going. Qualities of character hidden within. And so only about 10% of an iceberg is what you see above the water, right? So the bigger the iceberg, the more will be revealed above the surface. So you have two options in order to create material wealth, right? And the one is you can exert your energy swimming beneath that iceberg and swimming upward, pushing that iceberg, trying to emerge, get more of that iceberg to emerge, right? That's like pursuing wealth in the traditional way. It's a lot of work, and you would have to be just constantly actively putting effort into swimming upward to maintain it, right? The other option is to build your iceberg, make it bigger. And that's equivalent to becoming a more whole human, developing a stronger character, which, as we've demonstrated, happens as you draw nearer to God, right? As your character builds, as that iceberg grows, more and more material success and wealth will just naturally, gradually emerge.
Obviously, one is the more natural way because it's God's way and He's going to help and provide. When we are engaged in God's work, He will bless us with wealth to take care of us and to further His work. But when we try seeking for wealth just because we love wealth, you talk about how it's so dangerous and unhealthy for a weak character to receive wealth and riches. It's not helpful. It won't bring joy. We're focusing on God's footstool instead of His treasure. So it's wasteful, it's destructive, and that's so hard because I even find myself thinking, oh, okay, so if I love my neighbor and if I serve them and try and just be of value to society and be a good person, then I will get rich. Then I'll be able to get a big house and afford all these nice things. But then that's the wrong way of thinking. Your heart is still on the riches. Mm-hmm. And the point is to change your heart, to focus on God, to love Him and want what He wants. No longer focus on the riches and the wealth. It would be silly to do that because they're not lasting. They're just treasures of this earth. And the important thing is to lay up treasures in heaven, those things that last, right. Those things that will bring us eternal life and eternal joy.
Mm-hmm. He who seeks his life shall lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake shall find it. As soon as you stop trying to cling onto your material items, it becomes easier to hold on to them, ironically and curiously. Part of that is because you don't own as much, because you're not constantly accumulating and building up this tower of possessions that you become like the dragon in The Hobbit, where you've just got all this treasure and you're just sleeping on it. You got a big bed of gold, and dragons are portrayed as these greedy, treasure amassing creatures, but they're just constantly in their lair guarding it and suspecting any stranger who comes in of trying to steal their. It's like you're not enjoying your treasure and your anxieties are all bent on losing it. Mm-hmm. It's like you'd be better off if you just didn't have it. And that's kind of what I'm getting at with this little phrase at the end where I talk about riches are like a wild animal, that the more greedily and thirstily we chase after riches, the more difficult it becomes to attain and keep. Whereas if we, again, like we mentioned, if you develop a healthier relationship with money, with riches, by drawing nearer to God and gaining a more accurate perception of riches, then they will naturally settle into your circle of influence in their proper places. Not necessarily as possessions. You're not going to own it, but it will serve you in the way God intended for it to serve you, right? So to strip away the metaphor, riches are really of no value as mere possessions, right? Just like the dragon doesn't benefit from his bed of gold coins. Riches are only of value as they are spent. And so that's why I love that imagery of the animal and coming and eating from your hand. He comes, he goes, and you walk away a more full human.
If you're putting it to use for God's purposes, then that's where you will be rich, not in the just owning of it.
Right. Well, it's kind of the point of too of that parable that Christ gave. The man who has a particularly plentiful harvest, and so he decides to just build a bigger barn to store all of the food that he grew. And then God says unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. That plentiful harvest should have been used to benefit those around him as well as himself, rather than hoarding them all up in a barn where they'll spoil before you can even use them. He should have used it to bless those around him. And that doesn't mean just giving it away for free necessarily.
Yeah.
But rather than just hoarding them up, use them to strengthen the people around you so that they can be more full human beings and they will be more capable and disposed to help you.
Right.
The core question is, to what degree is your heart set upon the treasures of this earth? And in what direction is it moving? Is your heart becoming more set on the treasures of this earth? Or are you gradually loosening that hold? Because there's no question that all of us, to some degree, have our hearts set upon the treasures of this earth. And so the invitation then is to begin taking small, simple steps in the right direction, stepping away from greediness and covetousness and stepping towards trust and friendliness and love for God and your neighbor. And then consider some things that you could begin to do that in your daily dealings, when you're at work or with your family, in traffic, or at the grocery store. You might try to more fully adopt a view of your fellow human beings, not as obstacles to your success and happiness, but as wealth itself. And this reminded me of something that we saw once. Just this guy had this t-shirt that said, human beings, 1 out of 5 stars would not recommend. I mean, it is funny and it's relatable, but I saw that and I thought that is a sad, lopsided view to take, because it only focuses on the bad that humans bring to our lives and it completely ignores all the good. So just evaluating how we view and treat people in our day-to-day lives. You could also evaluate how you spend your time and consider removing some of the debris from your life in order to make room for more worthwhile and fulfilling pursuits. Rather than compelling a wish list of potential product purchases, you could keep a gratitude journal, crowding out greed and covetousness with an abundance of thanksgiving and contentment. If you're saving up money for a big toy or a vacation or something, you might consider going without and instead giving of that money to a church or a charitable organization.
In your footnotes, C.S. Lewis says, give more than we can spare. If our charities do not at all pinch or hamper us, I should say they are too small. There ought to be things we should like to do and cannot do because our charitable expenditure excludes them. I just think that it's
powerful.
It is powerful and hard.
It's hard to swallow.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've kept in mind in my charitable giving, I guess. But I mean, it really is a great litmus test of how much your heart is set upon your riches.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great way to try to curb it. And then finally, I just love this quote from Ruskin, where essentially he invites us to strive to be examples of people who rather than constantly aspiring for more, more, more. Instead, resolving to be content with what you have, be grateful, and find joy in your life as it is today. Again, the core question is your heart becoming more set on the treasures of this earth, or are you gradually loosening that hold? That's what's truly important. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section. We may address them in a future episode. Also, please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to the podcast. It really helps others find us. Finally, I wish you peace and success, and I look forward to chatting again.